Okay, it's 8 minutes after the hour, 7. I love the expression gut and replace. And this is the time of the year that happens. And even though we know it's happening, it still happens anyway. And sometimes it even gets defended by some of our lawmakers. And I guess there are some ways, some reasons to think that, all right, well, there's a vehicle here, and let's see if we can put wheels back on it. Pretty few examples of that happened last week. Aaron Johanson is here. We're here to talk about the remaining, the death throes of the session, so to speak. And first of all, good morning.
Morning, Mike.
Second of all, it's the day before tax day, which means it's the day before people are supposed to pay their Hawaii state taxes, which means they're going to kind of want to know who's monitoring the spending of their money. Mm-hmm. And you're one of those people. Frugal, I want to call you Frugal Aaron.
Thank you. It's a nice compliment.
Was I? Yeah. And I mean that. I think that if we took a look at many of you do as the budget for the state being just like our family budget, we wouldn't be spending quite as much money because we don't have it.
Yeah. We wouldn't do things that only make sense. I mean, I don't think they make sense in general, but government sometimes shouldn't, but it does operate by its own rules. Mm-hmm. No family and no individual says, I'm going to assume a base budget every year and then just decide how much I'm going to add to it or subtract from it. Everybody says, this is what I've got, this is what I got to make do with, and this is how I'm going to live.
I can remember as a kid, and I think you're right. Although it never was a spoken word, you always knew when it was what we used to call then when I was a kid, we used to call it whack-a-mole. Because what was whatever's in the house goes into the pot and gets served over rice. Mm-hmm. And I guess sometimes the later in the month you get, the more the chances are that you're going to have whack-a-mole instead of steak or whatever, right? So we automatically make these adjustments mentally anyway as a family? How come it didn't happen at the government level?
Well, that's what's the problem, both at the federal. It happens a little bit more at the state level because we have a balanced budget amendment that's part of the Constitution. But that's exactly the problem at the federal level. And even though we have a balanced budget amendment in our Constitution as the state, it still doesn't necessarily mean we're being as judicious and responsible as we should be in regularly examining expenses and expenditures.
I was disseminating a story earlier about how the IRS is strapped for people and examiners, and I'm wondering if in tight times, people that are pretty much so I'm following the leader type of thing are likely to stray and say, well, I'll make up for it next year. We have a big problem with this because doesn't that affect the amount of money that's going to come in, this consular revenue stuff?
It does, and I'll tell you it's a big problem at the state level as well.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
At DOTAX, there are people who have jobs who literally are to open up the envelopes to process the hard copy check returns. And, the lag time sometimes because of
it's expensive.
The people involved is substantial to the state and makes a big difference in what the cash flow is.
There's another thing, too, and that is one is the expected tax revenues and then against the real tax revenues. Mm-hmm. And the more people that don't pay, the more that gets affected. There are many people that say this, Aaron, and I know that it comes up, that, hey, the money's out there. We just got to go collect it. There's plenty of people that we know owe, but they're not paying.
Yeah, there are a higher number of tax, they call them scofflaws.
Scofflaws, yeah.
That exist than most people think, because the rest of us, we just send in our taxes, but, the government and DOTAX is often trying to figure out where's the right balance of how can we get something from somebody or just decide to prosecute. And most times it takes a while before they actually prosecute.
What makes me nervous or edgy is that a lot of people that correctly get advice or figure from themselves what their deductions ought to be, and they're gainfully employed, their employer is pretty much paying their taxes on time for them. Mm-hmm. So it comes at the end of the year, a lot of those folks are actually going to expect and be entitled to a refund because they've overpaid. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, there's somebody that gets shocked and says, well, I claimed an extra this and extra that because I wanted a little more money in my check. And now at the end of the year, I find out that I owe $1,500, but I don't have the money, so I'm just not going to file for a while.
Yeah, my roommate in college put it best when he said, if you're getting a refund, it's because you overpaid. If you're having to pay, it's because you underpaid. And so ideally,
it should be a wash.
Yeah, if we were figuring it out correctly. But, it's a maze to figure out, both at the state and the federal level.
There are many people that say, that, and they get shocked when they find out, that next year they have to pay income tax on what their refund was. And there are a lot of tax
Only
advisors.
three things certain, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Life, death, and tax.
Yeah, and the other thing is, of course, that what you say is true. By under declaring, what you're really doing is giving the government use of your money for a whole year, and you shouldn't be doing that. You should be making your own money so you can invest it. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of people that here in Hawaii are affected by this thing, and I know there's a lot of people that have shirked paying their GETs. In other words, there's money all on the floor out there all around the place. I don't hear of any legislation coming up to put teeth in these collection laws.
Yeah, usually the legislation that comes up has to do mostly with the cash economy, or the swap meet type enterprises, or the flea market types, and that's usually what you hear in terms of. There were a few measures that give tax inspectors a little more teeth and the ability to inspect, but they typically don't peter out to the end of the session.
Hey, there's a lot of people, Aaron, and I'm sure you've heard this, that are in the either vacation rental or bed and breakfast business that have been allowed to just sort of wander off the path of responsibility with regards to taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the state has to find a good balance between ensuring that its tax laws are actually complied with, and they're easy enough to understand that compliance is not rocket science, but also making sure that everybody's just not being targeted by the tax Gestapo.
I was trying to figure out, I'm going to give you this to think through during our break. I was trying to think if there were some examples of gut and replace, because I do know that there have been some. I saw some the other day. And even though we see it coming, it's kind of embarrassing that it still happens anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a function sometimes of only being in session for 60 legislative days, because it gives rise, and I'm not suggesting it should be longer. I don't know if I could take longer than 60 days myself, but it gives rise to this specter of we don't have enough time. That's why we have to replace this.
Yeah, they say, well, since this thing is a vehicle, and we don't like what's in it, let's just take everything out and put new stuff in and keep it rolling.
Yeah.
And the dance goes on. Rep. Aaron Johanson is in the house. We're talking about the session, and just before the break, we were talking about this gut and replace. Sometimes I think that those are pretty harsh words that offend kind of everybody, and I would assume that if a legislator or a group of them had a real good reason to take a look at one of these things, they don't want to have it referred to as gut and replace. Right. They want to hear it referred to as last-minute urgent legislation.
Yeah. It's all about the marketing. It's a lot of sales and marketing sometimes.
How prevalent is the lobby section at this time of the session?
It's pretty prevalent because now's when the rubber meets the road. What you typically see is it depends on certain variables. So when the Council of Revenue is projected downward to 0% growth, a lot of the people asking for additional spending requests knew that basically the chances were slim to none, just because the cash flow all of a sudden shrank by tens of millions. And so that's a significant lobbying point that happened in this legislative session. And right now, though, is the home stretch. So for the people who have bills that are still alive and causes that are still in need of some remedy, those people are working overtime right now in their lobbying efforts.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen a pickup in the email and the urgency, because it is a matter of urgency. Quite often it's referred to as hungry birds in a nest, the ones that making the biggest noise. And it looks to me, I don't know, how exact bills could be cited on this, but it looks to me like the nonprofit sector is really on thin ice right now because of funding. It's pretty tough, and yet the job they do is so important.
Yeah, and it's a critical portion of the care provider continuum, and something that the state can't do itself completely. And so it is important.
If they could, none of these nonprofits would exist, right? The state would just do everything that needed to be done.
I think sometimes the nonprofits and the private sector just do it better because they're more attuned to the direct need and better able to dispense the service quickly and efficiently. Well,
they are certainly less impacted by other things coming at them. Yeah. I mean, they're able to focus better than we are.
Yeah.
Do you know that Raphael just scared Aaron half to death because that door came open? He jumped like he was going to get shot out of a cannon or something. You don't know what goes on behind the scenes in radio. You can't see what's going on. But anyway, just before the break, we talked about that. And I know that you don't like them very much, these things, because they don't have a time to get vetted. I mean, there's no time to have hearings and get input.
Yeah, and there's differences on the scale of, how bad is a gut and replace. Sometimes if the bill's already been heard and the idea has had some vetting and you just put into a different vehicle, that's far more innocuous than this is a completely radically new idea that nobody's ever, it's never seen the light of day, and now all of a sudden it's in the final stretches of being approved.
Yeah, and it's just like, what is that? And where did it come from so quickly? One thing that I'd like you to ask you about before the news break is this. We right now know that there are some laws, and I can actually, let's do this. Let's go to Hawaii News now and listen to what Lisa Kubota and Ben Gutierrez had to say about a credit card fraud bill that the state legislators are looking at.
In the wake of the massive retailer data breaches this past holiday shopping season, some state lawmakers want to take steps to help protect your identity. As Ben Gutierrez reports, what they're asking for could put computer chips in credit cards.
The measure urges Congress, financial institutions, and businesses to move away from current credit card technology, which uses a magnetic strip, to newer methods to reduce identity theft. The State Office of Consumer Protection says in the last 7 years, nearly 230,000 Hawaii residents, or more than 16% of consumers, have been the victim of a data breach. House Concurrent Resolution 32 is aimed at reducing those numbers by using computer chips on credit cards rather than the magnetic strip.
What we're trying to do is trying to align ourselves with countries in Asia and Europe that have already started using this new technology.
The measure comes in the wake of last year's security breach at Target, which affected more than 121,000 Hawaii residents. Supporters of the resolution, like Takai, say it is needed.
We're trying to move this effort at the federal level and make it more global. But the fact is, there are many people, even in Hawaii, that are being affected by identity theft and the theft of credit card numbers.
Everybody's concerned.
But the Hawaii Bankers Association doesn't think a measure is really needed, at least at the state level.
We certainly agree with the intent of the resolution, but Congress is in fact acting on this measure. There's a bill in the Senate and a comparable bill in the House.
Pei also says Visa and MasterCard are already encouraging all card issuing banks and merchants to be ready for computer chip cards by October of next year. Those cards will cost more to make, and there will also be a cost to retailers to switch to new card readers. Whether or not the measure passes, it seems those cards are headed for your wallet or purse in the very near future. The resolution goes before a hearing tomorrow morning at the state capitol. Ben Gutierrez, Hawaii News Now.
Okay, now that being said, Aaron, I think what's important is there are some times when you look at something at a local level that maybe shouldn't be, dealt with at a local level. To me, a lot of that seems it is warm and fuzzy stuff to look like, wow, these guys are doing a great job. They're taking care of me. What is your feeling on the local measure, and how does it compare with what you're hearing in other states about what's being done maybe on a national level?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, to be honest, that is something that has to be dealt with at a national and a federal level because all of the credit card issuing companies
they're not here.
Completely nationalized. So. Existing nationally. So that's actually, and it wasn't really referred to in that news clip, but that's a resolution. And resolutions differ slightly from bills in that they really are just affirmations of how the legislature feels or wishes for some broader problem to be addressed. It isn't something that's binding. That changes state law.
That's why I brought it up, because my point is, in a short enough session anyway, why are we even talking about this? Why is it on the front page? And to me, it just looked like an opportunity for a couple of people to get nods from people saying, oh yeah, these guys are on it, they're looking after us.
Sometimes it's that, but quite honestly, sometimes good legislation, I don't know that this is an example of such, but sometimes good legislation emanates from an originating resolution. So a few years later, after there's critical mass for a particular issue that's been developed, sometimes starting through a resolution, you end up getting a bill. Now,
I never thought of that. That's why you guys do what you do, and I do what I do. I just get to complain about it. but I still do think that at this late date, we got a lot of stuff that we need to be concerned about. And like I asked you, how active was the lobby arm of of the legislature right now, and how inactive or active that the input to your office is. I mean, I don't want people to think, well, it's almost over, let's just wait and see what happens. Now's the time to me that seems critically important to make your feelings known.
Definitely. I mean, we're having to reconcile the House and the Senate versions of the budget. So, and that's going to dictate what we spend our money on as a state. Furthermore, all of that depends. Then the bills and the status of the bills are dependent upon that budget. So, right now is the most critical time to be lobbying.
What is the well, that's what I mean. It may be obvious that that's the case, but what are you experiencing? I mean, I know that you guys keep really good track in your offices from your own constituents.
We're experiencing a lot of lobbying, and it depends. It's sort of the issue du jour of the day, but we get a lot of emails, a lot of phone calls. There's been a lot of traffic and passerbyers. Each bill is different. For instance, on the rock climbing bill, there were a lot of hikers and rock climbers who were circling the Capitol and just milling around.
And that being said, I mean, we're taking a look at other things right now. As an example, Cromwell's Harbor down there, Diamond Head, the owners are fencing it off because they're worried about liability for people getting hurt because, it's happened. They've had to make some settlements. And yet all the people that go down there that say, well, I came down here with my dad and my grandfather, and we all come down here. But everyone breaks the law because they're looking at signs that say don't do this and don't do that. And yet it's the squeaky wheel. They're being adamantly opposed to this fence. That matters, doesn't it? To get out and say your piece.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Okay, so let's talk before we go to our news break. Let's talk about some things that maybe are important this week, and that how that people can maybe react to them and let their feelings be known.
Sure. As I talked about earlier, one of the main things that we're going to be doing this week is reconciling our differences on the supplemental budget. So that's the seminal document by which we're making our decisions of how we spend tax revenue and what priorities are allocated those resources to. Additionally, we're beginning conference committees. So this is where the House and the Senate, not just on the budget, but on actual bills. So, if you were in the Senate and I was in the House and we had different ideas but on the same topic, right now is where we sort of sit down and arbiter our differences and figure out what the final bill is going to look like. So these next 2 weeks really determine, the nuanced details of all these bills.
Is it true? Is it even accurate to suggest that a lot of these things come down to votes and they come down on party lines? And there's a one-party system here. But I would imagine that there would be a tremendous number of measures that would be sort of apolitical, meaning, listen, let's just do this because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Is that where some of these relationships get established between the D's and the R's, where you can work on other things after something successful happens?
Yeah, and what's interesting about this time in the legislative calendar is it's more focused on the House versus the Senate. So instead
the whole House is up for re-election.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of it's the House position versus the Senate position, so it's less focused on
D's and
party lines within your chamber and more you against the other chamber.
Is that because, by nature, like the city council and the mayor are checks and balances, that the House and the Senate are checks and balances?
Right. And so, if you're advocating for your position, it's more about your side's position.
Okay.
This is Mike Buck on AM 690, The Answer.
Okay, so I'm talking to Aaron Johanson off the air about sort of the massive amount of work that's got to get done from the beginning of the legislature towards the end. Now we're heading towards the end. I mean, this is the 14th of April, and they're supposed to conclude, right at May, which really gives us 2 weeks and a couple of days. And Aaron, and this may partially be due, and I think the other day we had Donna Kim in and talking about it from the Senate. It may be that even though a lot of people were opposed to the special session and cost and everything else, that the special session dealt with some issues that would have been probably a little bit much to get covered in a regular session with all the other stuff. Do you think that may have had partially to do with it with regards to this session looking like you can pretty much finish it up on time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there aren't a ton of really controversial bills this session, and sometimes there are, but it depends on your perspective. You know, one of the things that we were talking about during the break is obviously if you care a lot about kaka'ako or land use or development, you'd be paying really close attention to the Hawaii Community Development Authority bills and OHA's ability to potentially develop kaka'ako makai with residential units. But if that's not something that is your particular interest, that probably isn't going to be the most controversial set of bills.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because there's been a tremendous amount of front page ink and lead TV and radio stories about that. And it does affect me in a way, but not in a way that it's really changing my neighborhood. So maybe there are people in your neighborhood, in your area, in my area, that, it's Kagago. They'll fix it up. Somebody will do the right thing. But there are a lot of people that are trying to do the right thing there. Yeah. So we haven't seen the end of the controversy there, have we?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's certainly a lot of details to be worked out. But, you know, that's indicative of what this session has felt like, honestly, to me. There are some issues that if they're really big to you, they're very important. And
sure,
this is a major session. But, you know, there haven't just been that many controversial bills, to be honest.
I'm really curious about one thing. And even though I don't normally take email, a couple of them asked me when I was going to ask you about the UH. I do know that the University of Hawaii by design has autonomy, and that means that they have enough rope to hang themselves. They get to run their university. But it seems to me that we have spent a lot of time in the last couple sessions on the university, and that there is a feeling in the community of mistrust that maybe things aren't perfect in Manoa. And I know that you went through as a younger person just a few years back all the trials and tribulations about the cost of higher education and all of that stuff, that it's important. What's going on at UH? And do you think that maybe the legislature has properly stepped in and trying to become more guidance oriented with them?
Well, you know, I think what the legislature is currently struggling with right now is what's the appropriate role of legislative oversight versus where's the line
where does the autonomy
and micromanaging? And I think there are some bills, quite frankly, that reduce UH's autonomy and its ability to govern itself substantially, and born out of controversy. And so I think it's a good discussion to be having, but it's one that I don't know that we've answered well at the legislature, either in the House or the Senate, of what's the appropriate balance.
Well, putting things like athletics aside, because I do know that that's fiscal as well as directional. That there are other things there that are of equal concern, and this is rising costs and some of these other things.
Repair and maintenance.
Yeah, I was going to say the
buildings.
biggest thing seems to be in this thing that we've seen in government across the board in Hawaii, and that's either deferred maintenance or no maintenance. And right now we have an administration that claims this huge big surplus. And we have hungry birds in the nest, even in the state, that's saying, well, yeah, but our buildings are falling apart.
Well, I will note they've stopped running that campaign commercial.
Yeah, I should say. Yeah,
a long time ago.
Yeah, and maybe even because within, there's enough challenge within. Now, there's also some other stuff that is hard to differentiate, and this is to do, and I think most of the bills that had to do with this are pretty much gone, is that it doesn't look like anything's left on the table much for campaign contributions or campaign financing issues. Don't we still need to take a look at a lot of this and where the money's coming from and how open we are about showing that?
We do, most definitely, and there's still loopholes to be closed. There's not a lot of legislation that does that, that's still alive. The bulk of the campaign spending bills this session, had to deal with public financing. Most of those are now defunct.
Meaning they just get shuffled off to the side. One in particular that I took quite a few calls about, when it was on the front page, was that there's this one construction company or engineering company that had made huge amounts of campaign contributions to the governor's campaign, and it showed a list of everybody that gave exactly $6,000. I mean, are we blind? I mean, what would happen if an Aaron Johanson had several $100,000 contribution by somebody and everybody gave the max?
Yeah. Well, in fairness, law is written such that individuals can give irrespective of where they're employed, unless they're the president of the firm or the owner of the firm. Then their corporate identity and personal identity are the same. But
but people call me up and say, "Don't you think it's a little coincidental that everybody gives exactly the same amount of money, the max?"
It's certainly not. But it's been that way for most governors have been able to benefit from that, and a lot of city council members also end up having their war chests filled.
Now that being said, you cannot exactly blame a company who says to its employees, "Look, we're having this great year because we have all of these contracts. And to keep these contracts going, we need to really make sure that we're being very, very cost conscious on our bids. We want to get the low bids. And we also want favorable people in the state, House and Senate and administration looking at the work we do. So give until it hurts."
Well, I mean, I think it's really important that we make sure we don't return to pay to play. But, again, this is something where I think people struggle to find the right balance. What's the difference between pay to play versus preserving my ability to have free speech and whatnot? You don't see it as much, quite honestly, in the House and the Senate races because we don't control zoning, and certainly over state lands we have development purview, but over the private sector lands, it's not.
It also seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the number of bodies that you would have to contribute to at a state level is considerably more than if you take a look at the mayoral's race or the governor's race or even the city council.
Correct.
Because there's only 9 districts rather than in the state senate there's 25 and in the House there's over 50. I mean, when you get to that point, you can't give to everybody.
Developers are pretty smart about where to make their investments.
But the interesting thing to me is there's a bunch of young, newer politicians like yourself that come from the area where the growth is happening. And isn't that sort of interesting that a lot of people out in your neck of the woods are the younger legislators?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it's just a generational turnover. Some of it is, I think there are people who just feel like we need the next generation of leadership to step up.
It's sort of interesting when people start talking about how somebody is past their prime or past their time, and you think, well, wait a minute. What about all that experience that they've gathered among the years? So there are some people that talk about term limits, and some people say, no, don't, because if you did that, you wouldn't have any baton being passed on. But is that true? Because if you're not limited, wouldn't you consider that every single person coming in, if they beat you in an election, you're out of work? How much cooperation are you going to do on transition day? Probably not much. Take your own personal paperweight off the desk and walk out the door. That's why some that are saying that doesn't happen in the military because they expect to be replaced.
Right. I also think you can make term limits longer and find a right balance, but I don't think that any elected official is so irreplaceable that we shouldn't be regularly cycling people in and out so that you do get a cross-pollination of just different ideas. And I think what's most important about term limits is they have the ability to say if somebody knows that they've got a finite time to serve, I think they're much more likely to do what they think is right than just what is going to give them the longest
I think so
career.
too. I think so too. But there is one thing before our final break, is that if you take a look at it, why the whole House is up for re-election. Doesn't that seem like, well, what if there's a whole bunch of new people? Isn't that the idea?
Sometimes, yeah. You need new blood, new ideas, and a new way of doing things, coupled with that institutional knowledge. I mean, everybody's not going to be replaced all at once. So you get that balance.
Yeah, but what about every 2 years?
I've never seen the House turn over all 51 people at one time. And then you also have the Senate only half runs for office each cycle. Right. So,
but it's only because numbers would suggest that it's impossible for everybody that's in to lose. But theoretically, it's set up for that. In other words, if voters were really unhappy and they just say, throw the bums out, everybody goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so tomorrow's tax day. You got to file, even if you don't pay. And speaking about not paying, there's a whole bunch of people in these square buildings that are waiting for you to pay your taxes so that they can spend your money. And that's one of the great reasons why during the session we have Ling Johanson in with us, because he is the minority leader in the House of Representatives and has shown a pretty fiscal responsible air since we started these sessions. And I know there's a lot more to it than just that. It's not a matter of wanting to spend the money, but I've had so many people say, look, we have
Spending
so much.
it well.
Yeah, spending it well is the key. And I'm not sure that there are any measures that are still standing that are really going to sort of help in that area of being more, not just allotting funds, but making sure that they go to the right place and they don't get abused or misused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the tax relief measures were off the table as soon as the Council of Revenues projected downwards. There's still some tax credits for middle income and low income people as well as small businesses, but I suspect too they will end up being on the chopping block because the state will say we don't have enough money to fund these tax credits.
We have been told for months now, if not years, of the decline in applications for solar because of this tax credits. Is it safe to say that there have been many in that area that abuse these credits to the point where the legislators said, let's just eliminate them because there's loopholes? Do we need to continue crediting individuals for investing in alternative energy?
Yeah, certainly in the last biennium, that was a big controversy whether or not people were exploiting loopholes and it was basically bleeding the taxpayer. And I think, sometimes you still have talks about that, but what's mitigated it some is just that so many areas have reached saturation, according to HECO, that even if people still want to put up PV, they're not able to because HECO just says the circuits literally can't take it.
Okay, now that being said, who is looking at this to see if that's accurate or not? I mean, if I were the power company, I'd say that too, because I want to sell power. I don't want to sell, people giving me power. I don't want to buy it. I want to sell it.
Right. I think it's in HECO's interest to remain an energy producer rather than an energy transmitter. So certainly understanding that as their perspective, I think the legislature actually is moving several bills that would create a little more oversight or a little more, at least, of an objective assessment besides just their own, to be able to say whether or not that the saturation rates are true or whether or not their technological arguments against certain things are also valid.
What about this? Everybody knows that when they take a look at increasing rates, that they can't just do it willy-nilly. They have to get the Public Utilities Commission has got to approve these things. And yet one would take a very long look at who these people are. And, and obviously they're looking after our interests because they don't want to deny a utility of being able to function, financially function. If they started losing money, we'd all be in trouble.
And sometimes that's why the PUC denies applications if they think that it's too expensive.
Or denies the amount of increase.
Right.
What about this one? And that is hurting us all nearly and dearly. We've seen this horrendous health connector that just seems to be just burning our cash. Not anywhere near as many people as responded to this Obamacare stuff as expected, and yet we see headlines, and you can expound on this, how the major care providers, HMSA being one of them, is looking at a huge increase, particularly to small businesses. Isn't this exactly what we were afraid of?
Unfortunately, I think so. And part of the problem is just that the state originally missed the first round of being able to ask for a waiver for its exchange to say, look, we have high rates of insurance already. We already predated you by decades with our Hawaii Prepaid Healthcare Act, where the onus is on the employer. So we've got a great system. Leave us alone. Just let us be, and implement the rest of the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act in the other 49 states. We missed that initial period. The governor did in asking for that waiver. So then we were forced to comply, lest prepaid health care be jeopardized, forced to comply with setting up an exchange. And now we're trying to, to make something unwieldy that doesn't fit our system and is probably not going to work because we have such high rates of insurance already. So there isn't demand for an exchange here like there might be in the rest of the country.
You're so right. And one thing, Aaron, that it was said that the other day that somebody brought up that you could give everybody, all 7,000 people that they signed up, a car for their trouble, because this thing is woefully overfunded and underproductive. I mean, it just didn't really do it. But isn't this a microcosm of what happened nationally? It's just not working nationally either.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, and just, to be fair, having worked in the executive branch in D.C., any major rollout of some new huge government initiative is going to have its fair share of complications. But something that is this market of a change and this major creation should have taken more than this time to have implemented. And that's what I think you hear Secretary Sebelius saying, that the rollout was rushed. Now that she's not going to be secretary anymore,
no
she's
kidding.
a little more free to speak off the cuff.
And by the way, that thrown under the bus is a nice way to say it. But the by and large is, do you, as an optimist, I mean, hopefully you're an optimist. Because
I'm a realistic optimist.
Realistic optimist. That collectively we can find out, certainly healthcare reform was necessary, but maybe not, I mean, this can it be tweaked or does it have to be thrown out? I wouldn't think that it could even be thrown out, that it has to be fixed rather than eliminated.
It does have to be fixed because we missed that time to ask for a waiver. If we don't fix it somehow and get the exchange up, the federal government can say then, we're no longer recognizing your Hawaii Prepaid Health Care Act and its exemption. So now we're going to, tinker with that.
We often look to successful models of things happening elsewhere. I do know that a lot of times lobbyists will come in and say, look, in Vermont, this is how this works, and it works really well. Can you guys take a look at it? And you do. From what I understand, there were some like 18 to 20 states looking at our plan and saying, hey, why don't we just make it more like Hawaii? And if they got it, the big concern seems to be, and here's where you can put your lawyer hat on. They say if we had tort reform in Hawaii, then we'd even be better off than we are now. That we lost a lot of people and a lot of practitioners to places like Texas and other states that have good tort reform. Is this something that is going to be looked at, or is it even still alive?
I don't know that any serious tort reform is ever looked at the legislature, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think that's unfortunate, but that's just the predisposition of this legislature.
It seems to me that if you take a look at health insurance premiums and what of that needs to be set aside for malpractice, and when we've lost the huge number, particularly on the neighbor islands, of things like orthopedic surgeons, that somebody must be raising a big red flag and say, hey, you know what? Maybe this isn't quite so right. Maybe that they should call an ambulance before the attorney.
Well, Senator Green, who's health chair, because he's a doctor, has raised tort reform, but most of his colleagues aren't willing to entertain that. And where you see what can be frustrating the most about the legislatures, people can often see the problem, but they can't always diagnose why the problem exists. So they're then, along those lines, then can't make the jump to
how do you
logical
adjudicate
conclusion.
a fix? Right, yeah. And that being said, okay, now before we go running out the door, you said some bills, this is to do with the continual tweaking. Was the House impressed with the Senate's dealing in a timely fashion with their version of the budget?
I think so. I mean, I think Chair Ige and Chair Luke work really well together, and my guess is that it's just as it was in the last year. It'll get done in a timely manner and in a cooperative fashion. And sometimes it's just figuring out whose priority at the end of the day and whose position, whether the House or the Senate, is going to take precedence. I know that we can probably get a better answer next week or maybe even the week after. But if you were being a teacher this morning, how would you grade the session so far? In that it is this big election year that nobody thought anything was happening. Some things did happen. How would you give it? What kind of grade would you give it at this point? Well,
he smirked actually. This isn't TV. You can see his downward smile.
I didn't smirk. I smiled.
You smiled.
But I don't have any strong feelings one way or another. I feel like it probably will be described as sort of a workman year in the sense of
so like a B.
Maybe. A B might feel a little overly charitable.
Okay.
So maybe with great inflation.
Yeah. Well, but that gives us.
But I think it's been an okay session.
Yeah. Good. Well, we look forward to seeing you next week to see if those that made it or didn't make it this week, if you still think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Rep. Aaron Johanson will be back after a news break.